Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, imagine this for a second. What if a simple imbalance, like having too little salt in your blood, could directly affect how anxious you feel?
Yeah, not just feeling vaguely off, but actually changing your brain chemistry in a measurable way.
It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But that's the really fascinating idea we're digging into today in this deep dive.
It really pushes back on the idea that, our body's physical state and our mental state are totally separate things. This suggests a much tighter connection.
We're looking at some recent research exploring this link between low blood sodium, which is surprisingly common, and, well, behaviors that look an awful lot like anxiety.
And to really get to the bottom of it, we've looked at a health news article that highlighted the study, but more importantly, we've gone right to the source, the scientific paper itself, published in Molecular Neurobiology.
So our mission here is to unpack what this specific study found, help you make sense of the science, sticking just to what these sources tell us. We'll walk through it together.
Okay, let's start with the basics. The condition is called hyponatremia. Fundamentally, it just means you have a lower than normal sodium concentration in your blood.
Right.
And when that low sodium level sticks around for a while, it's called chronic hyponatremia. Now, for a long time, especially milder forms, it was often thought, well, maybe it doesn't cause many symptoms.
Yeah, maybe some confusion in severe cases, but not something you'd immediately link to anxiety, right?
Exactly. But this new study coming out of Fujita Health University in Japan decided to investigate that specific question. Could chronic hyponatremia actually cause neurological issues like anxiety and, what's the mechanism? And crucially, could you reverse it?
Really important questions. How did they even study that? You can't just give people low sodium for an experiment.
No, absolutely not. So they used an animal model, which is common in this kind of research. They use mice. And they specifically designed the model to mimic chronic hyponatremia in a way that reflects a common cause in humans.
Okay, what causes that?
It's something called the syndrome of inappropriate antidiuresis.
Right. Syndrome of inappropriate antidiuresis. Okay, what does that involve?
Well, essentially, the body either makes too much of a hormone called vasopressin, or the kidneys react too strongly to it. This hormone tells your kidneys to hang on to water.
Ah, so too much water retention dilutes the blood sodium.
Precisely, leading to hyponatremia. So the researchers needed to recreate that situation in the mice.
How'd they manage that?
They gave the mice a continuous infusion of a drug called desmopressin, which acts like that vasopressin hormone, making them retain water. And to help maintain that low sodium state long term, they also put the mice on a liquid diet.
Okay, desmopressin plus a liquid diet to simulate that water-retaining, sodium-diluting condition.
Exactly. The goal was to keep their serum sodium levels consistently low, mimicking chronic hyponatremia.
And did it work? Did the mice actually develop chronic low sodium?
Yes, the sources confirm they did. The mice getting the desmopressin and the liquid diet showed significantly lower blood sodium levels compared to the control mice with normal diets and no infusion. And this low level was maintained, so it was definitely chronic.
All right, so they successfully created the mouse model. What about their behavior? Did they act differently?
This was the first really striking finding. The mice with chronic hyponatremia showed more behaviors that scientists interpret as anxiety-like. There was a clear difference compared to the control mice.
And these aren't just subjective observations, right? They use specific tests.
Oh, absolutely. Standardized tests. The paper mentions using two well-known ones, the light-dark transition test and the open field test. Both rely on the fact that rodents naturally tend to avoid bright, open areas, and this tendency gets stronger when they're anxious.
So they measure how much time the mice spend hiding versus exploring.
Kind of, yeah. It allows them to quantify these anxiety-like tendencies based on those preferences.
Okay, so the behavior points to a link. Chronic low sodium, more anxiety-like actions in mice. But the researchers wanted to know why, the mechanism you mentioned, what was happening inside their brains.
Right, this is where they dug deeper into the brain chemistry. They analyzed brain tissue, focusing on areas known to be involved in emotion.
And what did they find there?
They really honed in on a specific area called the amygdala. You've probably heard of it. It's known to be critical for processing things like fear and emotion, regulating anxiety.
Okay, the amygdala. What was different there in the low sodium mice?
What they found was pretty significant. The levels of key brain chemicals, neurotransmitters involved in mood regulation, were noticeably lower.
Which neurotransmitter specifically?
The sources named two big ones, serotonin and dopamine. These are really well-known monoamines, vital for mood, motivation, feeling good. Disruptions in these are already linked to things like depression and anxiety in humans.
So in these mice, chronic low sodium led to less serotonin and dopamine, specifically in the amygdala, this emotional hub. That seems quite direct.
It does. One of the lead researchers, Professor Sugimura, is quoted saying something like, "Our data suggests that chronic hyponatremia disrupts the balance of monoamines in the amygdala, which in turn modulates innate anxiety. It points right at that chemical imbalance in that brain region."
And they looked even closer, didn't they? Something about phosphorylation?
Yes, extracellular signal-regulated kinase phosphorylation. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Ah, yeah, it is. What is that?
Think of it as another layer deeper. It's a molecular signal inside the brain cells. They found that this signal, which is involved in various cell functions, including emotional regulation, was also decreased in the amygdala of the low-sodium mice.
So it wasn't just the neurotransmitter levels, but also how the cells were signaling internally.
Exactly. It suggests a broader disruption at the cellular level within the amygdala.
Now, I remember the news article mentioned a potential reason why low sodium might even cause these neurotransmitter levels to drop. Something about how brain cells adapt.
Ah, yes, the volume regulatory decrease. It's a really interesting hypothesis. See, when the fluid around brain cells gets less salty because of low blood sodium, water tends to flow into the cells.
Making them swell up. That sounds
It
bad.
can be very dangerous. So brain cells have this protective mechanism, volume regulatory decrease, where they actively push out certain substances to counteract the swelling and reduce their own volume. It's vital for survival.
Okay, they push stuff out to shrink back down. How does that connect to serotonin and dopamine?
Well, the idea is that among the substances the cells push out are things called organic osmolytes, but potentially also the raw materials, the precursors, that the cells need to actually make neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine.
Oh, I see. So in protecting themselves from swelling, the cells might be accidentally getting rid of the ingredients needed for their own mood chemicals.
That's the proposed mechanism. Over time, this constant outflow, this volume regulatory decrease process, might deplete the precursors or mess with the production or recycling of serotonin and dopamine, leading to those lower levels they measured in the amygdala.
A sort of unintended consequence of a protective adaptation.
Precisely. It shows how complex these biological systems are.
Which makes that reversibility question absolutely critical. If low sodium causes this whole cascade, does fixing the sodium fix the problem?
That was the crucial next step in their research. Could they undo these changes, the behavior, the brain chemistry, by correcting the hyponatremia?
How do they correct it in the mice?
Pretty straightforwardly, actually. They stopped the desmopressin infusion, so the mice stopped retaining excess water, and they switched them back from the liquid diet to regular solid food.
Allowing their sodium levels to return to normal naturally.
Exactly.
And what happened? Did the anxiety-like behaviors go away?
According to the sources, yes, quite remarkably. Once the sodium levels normalized, those increased anxiety-like behaviors they'd observed just subsided. The mice behaved more like the control group again in the tests.
Wow, okay, and the brain chemistry? The serotonin and dopamine?
Also reversed. Those reduced levels of serotonin and dopamine in the amygdala went back up to normal levels after the sodium was corrected.
And the other signal, that phosphorylation thing.
Extracellular signal-regulated kinase phosphorylation that also returned to normal levels in the amygdala.
That is a powerful finding. The fact that correcting the sodium reversed the behavior, the neurotransmitters, the cell signaling.
It strongly supports the idea that the chronic low sodium wasn't just correlated with these changes, but was actually causing them in this model. As one researcher, Dr. Fujita, put it, it shows the symptoms can be alleviated with proper correction.
Okay, so this is really compelling stuff in mice. What does it mean when we think about people?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's so important to stress, this was a mouse study. Human brains and bodies are more complex. Findings don't always translate perfectly.
Right, the standard caveat.
But chronic hyponatremia is actually quite common in humans, especially in older adults and people with certain chronic illnesses.
Like what sort of illnesses?
Things like liver cirrhosis, heart failure, and that syndrome of inappropriate antidiuresis we talked about. Patients dealing with these conditions often have a lot going on, including psychological symptoms.
So could some of that anxiety or low mood sometimes seen in these patients actually be linked to their low sodium levels?
This study raises that possibility, yes.
Okay.
It suggests that maybe we should be considering chronic hyponatremia not just as a fluid balance issue, but as something that could directly impact mental well-being. Dr. Fujisawa noted their study was among the first to really provide evidence for this link to anxiety via brain chemistry changes.
It adds another layer to patient care, potentially.
It could. Professor Sugimura really emphasized the mechanism they found, that disruption of serotonin and dopamine balance in the amygdala. Identifying that specific pathway is key.
It makes chronic hyponatremia seem like more than just a number on a blood test result.
Exactly. Professor Sugimura stated clearly that their findings add to evidence that it's not just a metabolic issue, but has real neurological and psychological consequences. That shifts the perspective.
So what's the practical takeaway from the researcher's point of view based on this mouse data?
They stress that it underscores the importance of early diagnosis and treatment for chronic hyponatremia. And here's the important part. Not only to protect the brain, but also to improve mental well-being. They explicitly link treatment to mental health outcomes based on their findings.
But again, grounded in the fact that this was an animal model.
Absolutely vital context. Mouse studies are fantastic for exploring mechanisms, but we need more research to see how this plays out in humans, considering all the other factors involved in human anxiety and health.
So confirming these links in people is the next big step.
Definitely. This study opens a really interesting door, suggesting a potentially treatable biological factor contributing to anxiety in some contexts, but human studies are needed.
Okay, let's try to sum this up then. This deep dive has shown us some really compelling evidence, at least from this mouse study, linking chronic low blood sodium directly to behaviors that resemble anxiety.
And not just linking them, but proposing a specific, reversible mechanism for how it happens, involving lower serotonin and dopamine in the amygdala and changes in cellular signals, like that extracellular signal-regulated kinase phosphorylation.
And the really crucial part seems to be the reversibility. Correcting the sodium imbalance in the mice seemed to normalize both the brain chemistry and the anxiety-like behavior.
Which strongly points towards a cause and effect relationship in this particular animal model.
So here's something to leave you with. If a seemingly basic electrolyte imbalance, like low sodium, can trigger such specific, profound, and reversible changes in brain chemistry and behavior in mice, well, what does that tell us about the incredibly intricate connections between our own body's physical state, its fundamental chemistry, and our mental and emotional well-being?
It really makes you pause and think about how deeply our physical health might be intertwined with how we feel, maybe in ways we don't always appreciate.
It certainly does. Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.